Chapter 30. The City of Fire. The plains of Faldesia looked much like they had from above. The ground was mostly dirt and sand, but patches of grass and weeds accented it enough to keep it from looking completely dead. Unlike the welcoming soil of Avondale, the ground here was unforgivably rough. There seemed to be a layer of rock just beneath the surface, and some of the larger stones succeeded in forcing their way through the ground, some bumping up a span or two, others jutting into the air 20 spans high. In the dark it was hard to see many of them, and it became a constant effort for Caleb and Anselm to keep from stumbling and tripping. The soldiers who walked with them seemed accustomed to it, and walked as if they could see each and every stone. The horses were similarly aware and walked in strange patterns to avoid rocks and pits invisible to Caleb. They walked through the dark led by the horses for many hours, passing many outskirt villages, with brief moments of rest for the weary Caleb and Anselm. Eventually, they came to a wide river running east to west a half-mile in front of the city. A broad stone bridge dotted with more armored guards arched over it, and beyond it stood the walls of the city of Paladar. Even in the dark it was grand to behold. The stone walls were tall and thick, and 1,000 lit torches both from without and within gave it an enchanted look, as if the whole of it was covered in fireflies. The city was raised above the plains on a hill, thus obscuring the structures behind the wall, but the tall pinnacles of the castle towers far at the back jutted up for them to see even from their vantage point on the other side of the river. The bridge they had to cross was clearly built as a strategic defense against invaders from the south. It had been many years since there had been contentions with Manon, their southern neighbors, but Faldesia was a strong country and not one to allow peacetime to lower their defenses. The bridge was extremely wide, and a stone tower was erected on either side of it, with small windows cut from the stone at the top of them to rain arrows and stones down on enemies attempting to march through. Their party stopped a distance from the bridge, while the man in charge of the horsemen left to speak with other soldiers standing watch at the base of the towers. After a few awkward minutes of being stared down by dozens of eyes from the guards posted at the wall, he returned and they continued onward toward the city. As they marched over the bridge, Caleb saw more details of its militaristic nature. Jagged spikes lined the walls, and at the far end there were 2 more towers topped with giant cauldrons suspended by a pulley system. From what Caleb could tell, these could be dumped onto the bridge at any time, most likely to set fire to it. They crossed the waters, and followed a paved road on the other side to the city, where giant wooden gates opened at the command of the horseman's leader. They marched inside, and as the doors closed behind them observed that the single road they followed was a straight line leading up the hill to the castle walls. On either side of them large buildings, mostly shops and inns, loomed overhead, and countless roads branched off leading down to smaller neighborhoods. Similar to Tritus, many of the bigger buildings were constructed from stone, but these looked much more glamorous and decorative. The roofs were peaked, and many of the structures were faced with large glass windows and decorations which bounced wonderful reflections of the road's torchlights. He noticed glass wind chimes and bells hanging from many of the doors and signs. It made sense that they would work so much glass into their designs with all of the sand that filled Faldesia, but he questioned the wisdom of trading strength and sturdiness for such beauty. There was not much to be seen at this hour in the quiet streets of Paladar as they made their way to the castle, but Anselm mustered some nostalgic enthusiasm to point out places in his childhood home. He mentioned a festival square down one path and homes of old friends down others, including one which led to the shop where his parents resided. Caleb struggled through his weariness to pay attention. "Is it strange being back here after all this time?" Caleb asked, stifling a yawn. "With all we have been through in Tritus, these many years our paths have never crossed these lands. It seems like a fine place to spend a childhood." Anselm shrugged. "Paladar is a great city. And yes, it is very odd to see it again. Besides a few of the pub names, it looks like nothing has changed since Elle and I left." He looked up at his sister, sitting on the horse in front of Layla ahead of them. She was looking right and left with a blank expression on her face. Layla whispered something to her and she shook her head. "The city is fine, but spending my childhood here is another matter entirely," he concluded. "It brings back many unhappy memories, but those days are gone, and now I am here as a warden of Tritus. Those memories have made me who I am. My sister chooses to run from them by allowing high-degree hexes to take them away. I simply cannot do it, though whether out of wisdom or cowardice I'm not sure. Anselm must be tired, Caleb thought. He never talks like this. At long last they reached the castle walls, and after more formalities by the horsemen and several searches through their bags they were led inside. As they passed under the walls into the castle courtyard, Caleb looked back. He hadn't noticed much of an incline on their way through the city, but from where they stood now, he found himself looking down upon the buildings, having climbed almost all the way up the hill. They dismounted there and carried their bags, escorted to the castle by all 7 horsemen in a tight circle. Elastra grunted at having to walk again, especially while carrying baggage. Layla supported Leothran after she nearly fell over in mid-stride. Anselm stayed by Caleb, but his eyes remained fixed on Leothran. "She will be all right, I think," Caleb said, reading his thoughts. Anselm shook his head nonchalantly as if he didn't care. "Oh, I know. I'm just worried about what she said about the Seer Tarn. That there may be unknown effects of her changing. Let alone flying us here. She looks very weak." "She did say it would take a lot of her strength, no?" Caleb pointed out. "And we are all tired from all of the business in Shorewell. As soon as we can deliver our news and get Paladar undergoing defensive measures, we will all have time for much-needed rest." "Indeed," Anselm reached his hand into his satchel. "I wonder if there is something we can do to help her once all of this is over," he said. "I wonder if there is a way to destroy this thing and undo its curse after all." Caleb looked down and saw that he had pulled the Seer Tarn halfway out and was glaring at it. "There has to be a way," Caleb said. "You'd best keep that hidden." They climbed staircases and rounded hallways until they reached the upper levels of the castle, where they came to a large hall lined with pillars that led to the throne room. Ironically, the structure reminded Caleb of the chamber in Grimhall. The memory made him sick to his stomach. If their news could save Paladar, perhaps he could feel at last that Grimhall and King Rawlin had been avenged. After consulting with the posted guards, the lead horseman turned and spoke with them once more. "The king has retired to his bedchambers for the night, and must be summoned if you are to have an audience with him. I will escort you to some rooms where you may eat and recover until you are called upon." They were taken one level lower, and left alone in a spacious room that looked as if it often kept important guests. A long table ran down the middle of it, and large couches lined the walls. Above them hung a decorative chandelier made of colored glass, and on the walls hung large oil paintings of scenery and nameless people. As soon as they entered the room, servants filed in to leave food of all kinds for them to eat in quantities for double their number. They laid out on the table bowls of soup and pitchers of water, plates of fish, chicken and boar with fruit, hot vegetables and bread. "We will be outside the doors," said one of the soldiers who had escorted them there. "Do not try to leave the room. You should find that you have everything you need." When they were finally left alone, Elastra grabbed as much food as she could carry and sprawled out on one of the couches in exhaustion. Layla helped Leothran to one of the other couches, then filled a plate with food and took a seat next to her. Caleb and Anselm stood by the table sampling everything that was brought. "As grateful as I am to you, Leothran, remind me that I never want to fly again," Elastra said, holding her head. "I knew heights weren't my favorite thing, but who knew it would trounce me so badly?" "Imagine how she feels," Anselm snapped. "It is all right," Leothran said, rubbing her eye. "Even the Zaya in ancient days trained for many long years to do what you all did. I am impressed." "You do look a little pale," Caleb said to Elastra. "Perhaps Ansel can do a healing hex for you now." Elastra smiled at him and heaved a dramatic sigh. "I'll be all right," she continued. "I'm just complaining, that's all. I'm sure the lot of us could use a good healing." They all agreed silently and rubbed at their backs, arms and legs as they ate. Now that they had real cooked food as opposed to their travel rations, it was as if they had not had food in their stomachs for days. "Elastra is right," Layla said, standing and stretching, grimacing at the pain it caused. "If only there were baths around here. That is what I could use." "It will take the invaders at least a week to get here," Caleb said. "I am sure there will be plenty of time for that later." They all got their fill, and as time passed, Elastra and Leothran dozed off again, and Anselm found a comfortable corner to write in his records. Layla and Caleb walked around the room, looking at the intricate decorations and paintings. "Do you remember the time before Grimhall?" Layla asked him. "What do you mean?" "Before war broke out. Life was so simple in Tritus. You and Ansel would be away at the castle during the days. We would all have dinners at my home at nights and go to the dances after sundown. Talgus wars were just rumors from across the sea." "True," Caleb agreed. "Those days were not long ago, yet now they have vanished. War is the swiftest way to bring about change." Layla seemed to be thinking. She brushed her red hair from her face and held her palm to her forehead. He wondered if she was thinking of how the two of them had changed also. They had both been lost ever since their courtship fizzled. "I'm scared, Caleb." "Scared of what?" "Of what is happening to me. In Flagstaff Manor I saw the life of that man Palson. I have seen so many other people and places since then. It is as if I live in half a dream, but I know what I see is reality. I am a canvas and the world is filling me up." "You have been through quite a lot," Caleb said. "Are you sure it is not all just getting to you?" "I am sure," she said strongly. "Caleb, why can I see such things? Some of the guards that brought us here, I saw them die. They will leave children behind." Caleb gave her a concerned look. "You still believe me?" she asked. Caleb hesitated. "I believe you are being as honest as you can be," he said in an effort to bring it all back down to earth. "But it all seems so." "Caleb," she said, cutting him off. "When we first came to the walls of Paladar, I was certainly looking at it for the first time. But I can tell you that from that time until now, I have come to know every corridor in this castle." Caleb looked perplexed. "What?" "I could take us directly to the king's bedchambers right now if we were permitted. I know every room on every level, including the 2 levels of dungeons below the castle." Caleb was at a loss of words. He just stood there with his mouth half open, as if he wanted to say something. Layla turned and grasped his arms, looking past the painting in front of them into nothingness. "I don't know what is happening to me," she said in a quivering voice. "Do you think some darkness has come to claim me?" Caleb held her close. "No. You will be all right, I promise. I believe you, and we will find out what is going on, somehow." "How will I ever find out what in fate's name is happening?" "She will be all right. Won't she?" The doors to the room opened and in walked the lead horseman, the man from before. His light-colored hair had been tied back and some of his armor removed, revealing his large muscular arms. His sword still hung at his side. He walked into the center of the room with 2 guards on either side of him, and waited, while Anselm helped Leothran to a sitting position. There was a cheerier smile than before above the man's strong square chin. "Visitors of Tritus," he stated. "I am Olam, first knight of King Brackmore and commander of his royal legions." Elastra had stood from her couch. "Aha," she said and folded her arms. "I thought I knew you from somewhere. Prince Olam, is it not?" "As you say, milady. You were all the talk amongst the girls growing up. You have not aged a day." She bowed and the others followed suit. "You honor me where there is no need," he replied humbly. "And if you are sage Elastra of Tritus as you say, then it is I whom shall bow, but that is yet to be determined. The king will see you now. If you would leave your bags here and please follow me." They all did as they were told and followed him back the way they had come, this time entering the pillared chamber. The 5 of them arrived in a strikingly beautiful throne room, with tall glass windows scaling the wall and a row of 3 elaborately decorated thrones at the back. In the taller middle chair sat an elderly man with a clean-shaven face, wearing a long fur nightrobe. Olam led the 5 of them nearer until they stood 30 paces from him, and instructed them to stop. He and his 2 fellows then moved off to the sides of the thrones and waited with their hands behind their backs. Other guards armed with pikes stood along the walls on either side of them at the ready. "We have brought your guests, my lord," he said. Caleb, Anselm and Elastra were accustomed to meeting royalty and bowed to one knee appropriately, their fists on their hearts with bowed heads. Layla and Leothran followed their example, Leothran falling to one knee a little quicker out of exhaustion. The old man looked at them in silence. He was slumped low in his chair, and a hand covered half of his face as he pondered, his eyes moving over each one of them. He looked like a kind man, but one deprived of sleep, and his forehead was filled with weary wrinkles. At last he stood. "Rise," he said in a soft voice. "I am Brackmore, king of Faldesia, and ruler of Paladar. You will forgive the absence of my wife at such an hour," he said, motioning to the empty seat beside his. "And I see you have met my son, Olam. He tells me you bring most ill news this night. Odd rumors are no stranger to the ears of a king, but this is more than bandits in the mountains or uprisings in the city. Tell me your names." Caleb bowed his head lower. "Your Majesty, forgive our sudden intrusion, but I am afraid you have been told the truth. I am Caleb Rembrandt of Tritus. These others of our company are Alastra and Anselm Flitchett, Sage and Warden, Layla Starlahand and Leothran Marley." He gulped as he said the words, realizing that Leothran's foreign name might raise more questions, but the king did not seem to pay it any mind. "Ah, yes," the old king said. "Caleb Rembrandt. I believe your lineage, for I see Master Damon in your face. Your father and I met long ago, yet seeing you here in my halls takes me back to the past as if I am speaking with him yet again. It is an honor to have you in my court. And you also, Lady Alastra," he said, turning to her. "It has been long indeed since Paladar housed a sage. Our wardens are strong, but without a high sage of our own this past decade, we do not have the means to train further." The king bowed to them all in a surprising act of humility, and they all returned the bow twice as low. King Brackmore signaled to his pikemen that all was well, and they moved off to stand in the corners. "Now," he said, "while I am glad to find you speak the truth, I fear it as well. What tidings do you bring?" Caleb inhaled sharply to explain. "Your Majesty, we have lived through an all-out attack in Avondale, and are witness to the Estelan nation of Talgarth taking port in Manon. From there, they launch an attack against Faldesia, and mean to march here to its capital Paladar and crush it." "And you know this?" "You are certain?" asked the king. "I am. I was able to hear it from the mouth of the queen herself." Some gasps came from the nearby soldiers. King Brackmore nodded slowly in thought, looking down at Caleb with penetrating eyes. "This is indeed ill news you have brought me." "They march with men and gruels, Majesty," Caleb went on. "In Manon we saw delivered a large host fresh from Talgarth on ships." "Manon?" the king growled to himself. "Fate exiled that country. Did Talgarth meet no resistance there?" "I have heard nothing from the borders." Caleb shifted. It was their speedy flight that had allowed them to deliver the news before any messenger could. He hoped the issue of timing did not arise. "I am afraid it appears that some sort of treaty has been made," Caleb answered. "A treaty that gives the invaders free entrance to their lands if none of the blood of their people is spilt." King Brackmore laughed. "We shall see if that treaty will protect them. The fools. What can you tell me of their march? How long do we have to make ready?" "A week from now, and they will be at your doors," Caleb said gravely. The king paced in silence, then returned to his throne and sank into it again. His eyes narrowed. "Send runners to the borders immediately and riders to the cities sounding the alarm," he said to Olam. "And call in the patrols to regroup around the southern regions." Olam bowed to his father and was off with his men trailing close behind. "All of you," King Brackmore said. "There is much to be done. My kingdom and I are eternally grateful for your valiance. Olam reported you were found very weary from your journey. You may rest here as long as you like, and when you choose to set out for home again, I will supply my best steeds for you." They all looked at one another, and Anselm spoke. "Your Highness, my sister and I grew up here in Paladar before we left for Tritus. It is our home, and we are here to help you fight." He looked down the row, and each of them nodded in agreement. "We are all here to fight." King Brackmore sat up in his seat and smiled at the kindled spark of valor. "Your help is appreciated more than you know," he said. "Now all of you get the rest you have earned, and worry not for the time being. I shall see you are taken care of." Even as he spoke, a huddle of escort guards surrounded them, all bearing new looks of goodwill and admiration. "Rest well," the king said. "I will call on you at a later time." War comes and it will not be sleeping this night.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Episodes go live every Monday and Friday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. The audiobook can be purchased in its entirety on Google Play Books. Get the whole trilogy now in both paperback and ebook formats. All links are in the description.